Hello and welcome to Compounding Curiosity. I'm your host Kalani Scarrett, and this podcast is all about compounding your curiosity alongside my own through thoughtful interviews with interesting guests. For transcripts and detailed show notes, check out the links in the description. Hopefully you're as keen as me to learn something new, so let's get stuck in. My guest today is Murray Hunter. Murray has been involved in the Asia Pacific business scene for the last 40 years as an entrepreneur, consultant, academic and researcher. Murray was named one of Asian Correspondent's 35 selected bloggers in the region's blogosphere based on quality of reporting, relevance and popularity, and has also authored multiple books. In today's conversation, we discuss his new book with Lim Teck Ghee, Dark Forces Changing Malaysia. So we go deep on the dark forces changing Malaysian society today and what the future may look like for Malaysia. So I had a blast with this one, so please enjoy my conversation with Murray Hunter. So Murray, honoured to have you on the podcast today as, you're a titan of the Asian Pacific blogosphere and someone I look up to immensely. But for someone who might not know you yet, could you just give a brief introduction of who you are and what you do?
Okay, well, I came to Asia on business back in the 1980s and the 1990s. Had a company in Indonesia for the family business. Then I sprung out on my own just before the Asian economic crisis in 1996. So I went through Malaysia through that crisis with a startup company, having bad debts around 60% at that time, and learned all sorts of ways about how Asians go through that cycle. Is you just have enough money to eat, and that's very good already. Then I became a farmer. I wanted to make raw materials for some of the products I make, and I started a tea tree plantation with the state and the federal government in the northern part of Malaysia, Perlis. Did that for a number of years, and then I got invited to be a professor at the local university, which was just formed. So I became an academic and helped build a couple of faculties there, the bioprocess engineering and then the business faculty. And then I was lucky to get seconded around government departments on the 9th Malaysian Plan. So I really learned about Malaysian bureaucracy, government, worked at the top where the ministers are, at the bottom where the people are, and got a lot of impressions and information, and was able to reflect upon what Malaysian life is really like economically, socially and politically.
So is it fair to say as well that there was no real plan before heading to Malaysia? Like, was it always a long-term goal to stay in Malaysia, or you just fell in love as you went along, I guess?
No, actually I got invited by Rafida Aziz when she came to Melbourne. And we had afternoon tea at Malaysia Hall, and she said, "Come, welcome. We want all people to return and contribute to the country." So all these romantic ideas about helping to build the country I fell for, and came, and it was a one-way trip. I didn't have any intention of going back, because going back was failure. Because if you're starting a new business and a new life and you have to return back to Australia, then obviously what you were attempting to do didn't work. So now we're from 1996 to 2022, I'm still here.
I was going to say, it's been a journey. Honestly, I'm kind of jealous. Like, you're kind of living my dream, I guess.
Yeah, no, you be careful what you wish for, though.
That's true. So you've written books before as well, and there was a 700-page monster on essential oils. But what made you want to write this one on Malaysia's dark forces?
Well, actually, there was another couple of books between that. The first book on essential oils, a lot of people said to me, "Oh, you have to write a story about your life," and that's a bit egocentric. So I thought I'd better write about the essential oil industry, because there was never a guide that mixed chemistry, agriculture and business together. And I thought that was going to be a real interesting thing to go into. So I sat down to write it and found that this was a massive exercise. It was, I think, 700 pages that equated to about 400,000 words. And there were times that I thought that 2.5 years it took. So after I finished that book, I was emotionally exhausted. So I didn't go on the trail. I went to a couple of conferences and spoke as an author, and found what it's like to be an author. You actually do get groupies and people that want to come and get autographs and admire. But personally, I found I didn't want to talk about essential oils. I wanted to talk about entrepreneurship. So I went for a run one morning, and within a split second, a whole meta theory of what entrepreneurship should be came to my head. And then I spent 4 years writing out that idea that came in a split second. And that was massive. It actually had to be published in 2 volumes. And there were times I thought I could never finish it. It is like building something that you could never, and you just had to keep plowing away and plowing away, knowing that you're probably only 20, 30, 40, 50% away. And it actually ended up being more than 575,000 words. But it wasn't a bestseller. It was the type of book that went to universities, and you can walk down the street and nobody would know who you are for the rest of your life. But it made a contribution and got me to places like Deakin in Melbourne, to Krems University in outside of Vienna, speaking with all the top academics. And then when that was over, I kept writing, because I enjoyed the writing. What I loved was the research, and then putting it down on paper and going through it, and cutting new areas. So where I was living in the north of Malaysia and going to Thailand every day. So I started writing metaphysics, and using experiences in temples to explore cognitive issues and all that sort of stuff. And then I stopped in 2015 when I stopped at university. I went back to Thailand, and I had a retirement house built in Rayong. And for 4 years, I pursued a completely different thing. I became a cyclist, and I cycled over 100 kilometers a day for 4 years. And then I found out that physically I was like a 30-year-old, and mentally I started to actually feel I was becoming slow, and couldn't remember. I lost that sharpness. And I remember going down to Brisbane for a holiday, and the mind wasn't that good. So I was thinking, maybe I should, research on the internet and write something, just an hour or 2 a day, just to bring that edge back. So I actually found one issue about that Cardinal Pell issue. And I looked at the evidence. I'm not a Christian myself, but I just looked at the evidence and something was not right. So I wrote about that, and then I looked at the Assange issue, and I found that a travesty of justice. So I wrote an article on that, and I sent them to the Asia Sentinel, who knew me for a number of years. And then a friend of mine in Columbia University, Azli Rahman, asked me to write the foreword for his coming book. And that sort of took me back. That was like, that's going to be hard. So I refocused on Malaysian politics, where the Pakatan Rakyat had defeated UMNO. And everybody, I thought the country was back on track. The new government would do all the reforms they did, and I found out that no, it's not like that. So a whole lot of things are going on, and then I started getting my passion back, and I just started doing articles on Malaysian politics again. Then COVID came. There was nothing else to do, so writing was the only way to sit in a house where there was a curfew at night. There was restrictive travel. And I just kept writing. So I ran in the morning. I always do my 15 or 20 kilometre run in the morning, and that gives me an hour and a half to 2 hours of a completely clear mind. And suddenly you get these glimpses of what you feel passionate about. And I would write according to what I felt important and what I felt passionate about, and enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for the writing, not for any notoriety or anything else. I did it purely because I just enjoyed it. So then Dr. Lim Teck Ghee contacted me through social media because we were in the same WhatsApp chats groups, and I didn't know who he was. I thought he was some old crazy man because we get a lot of crazy people on chat groups. And he started asking probing questions. And I thought, this guy is not the usual rat bag. And he started sending me links, and suddenly I realized these are his articles. So then you Google who the man is, and I said, oh, okay. So we developed a good relationship, and we actually wrote a couple of articles together on a budget. And then he invited me to write a set of articles and put it into 2 book volumes for the coming election. And the book was not the end in itself. The book was a means to put ideas across to the people and continue. And that hasn't finished. We're donating or we're using all the funds we get from the book commission to, originally it was going to be for people who were arrested for political writing and not given a fair trial, but nobody wanted to run this foundation. So now we've decided that we're going to use the money to have a seminar on a multiracial party to oppose the government. So I'm happy with that. So the books have actually got this purpose. So that's the new thing about writing, is writing to achieve objectives rather than writing for the sense of, oh, you know, I'm a superstar and ego. So when I was in KL last week, I met all his comrades and people, and I found out that 2 years by myself in complete isolation, the writing actually had impact that I never thought had. And I also found on my Substack that it's just been climbing over the last few months to areas that I did not envisage when I started it. The Substack project for me was simply a website, because I couldn't use WordPress. It was too... and then I liked the idea that it sends emails. So it took me 1 year to collate all my old writing with some new writing, and it's all there in one collection. So I thought maybe somebody in 10 or 20 or 30 years' time can go and access that as a resource. And I'm actually finding articles that are 10 years old, like how Australia spies on its own citizens, has gone from having 2 or 3 hits. I think it's up at 7,000-8,000 now, and it's a article that's a decade old, but it grabbed traction somewhere in Australian chat groups. So I've got this resource that I actually don't know where I'm going to go with it, whether I should keep it as just a repository or I should make it popular and write all these penny dreadfuls about Malaysian politics. So I've learned a lot too, targeting audiences, because about 80% of the audience is Malaysian. So it's actually restrictive because I want to write more on geopolitics and Australia. But when I write about a different subject, you start losing people and you get these unsubscribed coming through. When you go back to Malaysian politics, you get a whole new cohort coming in. So it's just an interesting journey, which I'm enjoying.
No, it's interesting as well, and it's awesome to see because, yeah, it's such a great resource. And for the book as well, how different did you find the process co-authoring a book, and what does that process look like?
Okay, yeah, well, I've co-authored stuff with 4 or 5 people, and I've written some deep metaphysical stuff with Azli Rahman at Columbia University, and I enjoyed it because we could go beyond our own intellectual capabilities. So it was a very, very good experience. With some other people, they want to be lead author. They're pedantic on the semantics in the article, and it just gives me a headache. And even though some of these people are brilliant, it's just not worth going through. But with Dr. Lim Teck Ghee, I just found it so easy. And we thought the same way. And when I went down to KL on the 14th of this month, he invited me to stay with him. And I found out that his whole daily routine, he wakes up the same time as me, he goes to bed the same time as me, he eats the same time as me, he researches on his computer the same time as me, and he writes the same time as me, and he moves around his apartment and house, not working in one place. And I thought, this is just so uncanny. So I think we developed this very close relationship now, which is going to go on to other things, I hope.
Perfect. To bring this back to Malaysia, just for the book overall, writing it, did your opinion of Malaysia change during the course of writing the book?
No, because what we're writing is the oppression of what we see, and we both wanted to reflect that and put that out and offer alternatives. So there was an objective behind the book, and in some way it was an analysis, and in the end, the last chapter that we quickly wrote was sort of a manifesto.
And yeah, if we could dive into the nitty-gritty of Malaysia's dark forces, could we maybe start with the Malay Elite and who they are, what are their goals, and why they're maybe hindering a vision of a better Malaysia?
The Malay Elite, some people call it the deep state, and I did a series of deep state articles which they couldn't put in the book because I don't think it would have got through the Home Ministry. They were good, real good articles that took a long time to write, and they were very reflective about what I found out and knew personally. So it comprises a few different groups. So the first part of the elite, of course, is the monarchy, which is 9 royal households, because each state has their own monarchy. And they have a lot of constitutional powers which haven't been tested. They can actually select the chief minister in a way different from Australia, where you have to put up 3 candidates and they can select from one of the 3. And they have a lot. They call the state councils or the state cabinets in for pre-cabinet meetings to talk about what they're going to discuss in the cabinet meeting and what the view of the palace is. And they're not a unified group of people, because over the Najib issue of getting a pardon, half of the families want to give him a pardon and the other half are terribly opposed to it. So it's not unified there, not homogeneous. Then you've got the Malay-centric politicians themselves, and those names have been there for 40 years. You know, you can look at Mahyudin, Mahathir, Hishamuddin. They've been there a long time, and the younger generation is saying, hey, you know, we want our chance, and they won't move aside. So this election has got the old guard. Although Lim Kit Siang on the opposition is not running next election, Anwar said that this is his last chance. If he wins and becomes Prime Minister, it's 1 term only. He'll be he said a transitional Prime Minister. But the elite on the Malay-centric side, they're the ones that make the decisions and have for many years. Then you've got the Islamist, which is also another divided group. and you have JAKIM, the Malaysian Islamic Development Department, which has tentacles into all aspects of Malaysian society, and Malaysia itself, through the civil service, has become much more Islamic. And then you have the civil service themselves, who really run the government. And it's like yes minister, but in Malaysia it really happens, Malaysian style. So these groups interact, rub up against each other, and they're the forces that are really running the country. Some people call it the deep state. Now people I see have been calling it the dark forces. But that's who's really holding the power in Malaysia. And it's not, you can look at other countries, you can look at Thailand, you can look at where I am now. To a lesser extent, you can look at Australia. I've actually written a long article about who rules Australia. It's fascinating. I did it on Singapore. Of actually who rules the country and who holds the power and the influence. Very interesting subject.
Yeah, and it's amazing how anything gets done in Malaysia with all these groups rubbing up against each other.
But the same thing's happening everywhere else. That was the paradox. When I was in KL and Penang and Malacca last week, there's a reality check. You know, the place is vibrant, the people are vibrant. You see all the skyscrapers going up. I think the world's tallest building's just being completed and the lights are on there. And you see all these things, and it's so paradoxical to, what actually happens.
Yeah, no, we literally stayed across from, is it PMB 118?
Yep, that's in it.
Yeah, we stayed across from it, and yeah, it's amazing how quick it's gone up and nearly done.
Yeah, it's very thin though, it might fall over.
We'll see. And a good point, rolling into the next one, we've mentioned a jib, but corruption. So you've written before that corruption is a problem, but that 1MDB was only the tip of the iceberg there. So how and maybe why has corruption taken a foothold in Malaysia?
That was something that was widely discussed last week. Musa Hitam, who was a politician of the 80s and the 90s, and he split from Mahathir. He said when the NEP, the new economic policy, which positively discriminated towards the Malay and Bumiputra citizens of the country, created materialism in the Malay culture. You know, Malays lived in the kampong and they were happy, and they were very nice, content people. But suddenly having the opportunity to acquire money and wealth through debt in some cases, because that's what they did, control the people through debt, created this greed. And making money became, one of the priorities of somebody during their career. And you can see it now endemic through all parts of the bureaucracy. At the university I worked at, I saw even the supervisors and mechanics would work out ways of how they could rip off the bills, when university cars were serviced, and it just went everywhere. And sadly, that's an aspect of Malay society, an ugly aspect.
Yeah, so to touch on Malaysia's race-based political system, what are the downsides there? Are there any upsides to it? And how could this be improved?
I can't see any upsides, but there was, when Malaysia was formed, and Malaya was formed first, the British asked UMNO, which were the first group representing interest to become independent. The British said, you must have representatives from the other major communities. So the Chinese were co-opted and formed the MCA, and the Indians were co-opted and formed the MIC, the Malaysian Indian Congress. And independence was given to all these groups who collaborated and acted with consensus probably in the 1955 to 65 to 69 as a collaborative cabinet. And it really didn't matter that this party represented this race and looked after their interests, and that party represented another race, and it seemed to work. But after May 69, when there were race riots and many people died, there became this hate and envy between all the different ethnic groups, and that's been used to benefit parties electorately. UMNO has used that race card on and on again, and it's become very destructive on Malaysian society.
So if we look to Malaysia's neighbour Singapore, are they a good example of how they've managed and integrated their demographics despite having a different mix?
Oh, Singapore is another example of a small elite controlling their society. And I've had friends write about Chinese privilege. I wrote about Singapore's Malay dilemma, where Malays are discriminated against, where Malays can't become fighter pilots, can't get the top positions in the armed forces, and this type of discrimination. But yet having an elite group of Malays that collaborate with the inner circles, they get promotions. So there's a whole lot of idiosyncrasies in Singapore society where it's not really what they purport and represent themselves to be. But you can read about that. I've written a lot of stuff there.
Yeah. And so all these problems in Malaysia or dark forces, it's kind of led to a bit of a worrying brain drain, which also includes corporations like Grab. It's not just people. But is this reversible, and how would you go about fixing it?
Well, it's not just a brain drain in people. It's a brain drain it's a drain of innovation. So Grab is an innovation. There's a lot of other companies that are Malaysian nationals that have chosen to do their startups in places outside of Malaysia. And a lot of Malaysian executives were CEOs and high managers in Hong Kong and Taiwan from the 1980s onwards. So there's been a brain drain in Malaysia for decades. And now we see Malays themselves going to other countries in search of better economic and social opportunities. To reverse that, Dr. Lim and I purport that you have to get into multiracial or non-race politics and create a society that has equality of opportunity for all. So we argue that you need a multiracial party to represent the citizens against the Malay-centric people who now control and hold power.
And you've written before that as demographics change, it allows for certain narratives to change. So could you just talk about what are those narratives?
Okay, well, we have what we called in Malaysia Ketuanan Melayu, or Malay superiority, or Malay privilege, or Malay special position. And now the Malay population is 51% of the whole population of Malaysia. And Islam has been pushed through the education system and through the social system, where Muslims, and particularly Malay Muslims, see Malay as an important, Islam as an important characteristic of their identity. From that, which I empathize because I lived in that community, and I can see if you're a Muslim and a Malay and you're the majority population, why can't you have a Malay country? I understand that. But for the other 49%, is it fair that they should also be forced to live in that sort of society when independence and Merdeka and the formation of Malaysia itself with Sabah and Sarawak and then Singapore came in, purported and promised to be a multiracial and multicultural society. So this is a dilemma now. So there's that strong narrative coming out that Malaysia should be for Malays, where history started Malaysia as a country that was going to be a multiracial success. So this is a paradox now, and this is the fight, and this is what's going to happen in the coming election.
Yeah, because what happens to the other 49%?
This is the issue. This is a big issue. And the government is blatantly saying, some politicians are saying, go. We don't want you. So that adds fuel to the fire.
Are there any positive forces? We covered some of the dark forces. Are there any bright spots that Malaysia has?
I was at the airport writing some responses to your question, and I was thinking in my head, what's the next question? But when I arrived in Phnom Penh at the airport, I saw the Maybank ATM, and then I saw Malaysian influence in the local economy, and I've seen that in Thailand, I've seen that in Indonesia. So I see Malaysia's business expansion into the region, and I look at it through the lens of being an Australian who, in my heart, wish that we as Australians had the influence that we should have had in Southeast Asia. You know, from after World War II, we saved, parts of Borneo. You know, we were the forces that went and pushed the Japanese out, and we were in Sito. We had a jet squadron in Penang, and we had troops in Singapore, and where are all the Australian companies? We built the Friendship Bridge in the border between Laos and Thailand. So as an Australian, I'm very sad that we're not here in force and have influence and good relationships with the governments here. So seeing Malaysia's taking the opportunity that we missed out on, it's positive for Malaysia, but as an Australian, I'm sad that we missed that opportunity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And for lack of a better word, it shits me to tears that, we have no real ties, influence, like when we could be.
Yeah.
Even culturally, my mates look like they think I'm a weirdo because I'm so interested in ASEAN. And,
yeah. So that's something to write about and keep pushing.
For the state of political analysis in Malaysia, you've written before that there's now more political analysts than politicians themselves. So, what does this all mean going forward, I guess?
Probably they don't have enough storybooks. But what happened in the 90s, when the internet first started, the media was controlled by the state. And then the internet brought, when Anwar was arrested, the Reformasi website. And that was a beacon of free speech. And you'd read all these things that Mahathir had a tunnel from his office in Putrajaya to the airport so he could make a quick escape if he had to. And Malaysians became captivated from, he's got an island with Sami Velu, who was a minister for works, an Indian, off the coast of India, and one day they were going to jet off and squander all their beacons. So these stories came. So now I actually did an article. There's 35 major blogs that people tune to, plus there's another probably 15 or 20 news portals which are all giving political news, and there are some really good analysts there, but there are people that like to write really gripping articles on what such and such is going to do, assuming that this is in his head, and how such and such is going to retaliate. And some of them write it that is actually really good reading. And some of it's true, some of it's not true, but people are thriving on it. And I've seen, I use some of the web-based software to see how many hits they get a month, and people read it. So that's what's making Malaysian politics very interesting, because of the slant different people are putting on it. And all we are doing is telling stories about what we believe the future is going to be. So as a writer, it's very interesting.
I love it. And back to Malaysian politics, I had this one at the last minute, but if you were Prime Minister of Malaysia, how would you approach policy in a pragmatic manner?
Oh, many things to do. And this is a question without warning. I would dismantle the Islamization within government and go back to secular government. That's not being anti-Muslim. That's just saying that there's no place for religion in government. Then I would reform the education system to bring back critical thinking and teach creativity. I would really do away with a lot of the tertiary institutions that teach degrees, and bring back more vocational TVEI education, where you can teach people to be car mechanics, teach people to be plumbers, teach people to be electricians, teach people to make shoes again, and turn handicraft into art, and actually create economic movement down at the micro SME and individual limit, rather than at these government-linked and owned corporate socialist companies. So that would take years. There would be all these dark forces that would stop you from doing it.
And before I get into my closing round of questions, is there anything we haven't talked about that's consequential about the future of Malaysia?
Yes. We're looking at the rise of Indonesia. I believe Indonesia is going to be a major power. I think the voice of Indonesia is actually going to be much more influential than the voice of countries like Australia, and you're seeing that now. You're seeing the diplomacy. And when SBJ was president, he had a policy that of mutual existence and cooperation. So they could very easily live with the Chinese and the US military presence in the South China Sea and subscribe to coexistence. And what are we doing? We're talking about these agreements like AUKUS, which is about buying some nuclear submarine with firecrackers 30 years in the future. You know, if there's going to be any conflict in the South China Sea, by the time we get these submarines, everything's over. So I think Malaysia has to face that. The city of Nusantara, the new capital, is going to be on Borneo. So Sarawak and Sabah have another place to look to, and other than Putrajaya and Kuala Lumpur. So that's going to open up the whole region. You've got the rise of India and the influence of that it's going to have in the region, because it's going to push back on China. And you have to live with this rising China without paranoia that they want to take over the countries. I find it very funny that we have 1 million Chinese ethnic Chinese people living in Australia, and people are scared that China's going to invade Australia. They already have. They're there. They're not going to go and invade when they've already done the job. And there's so many things that I see positive, because I'm helping somebody in trade. The Belt and Road Initiative is actually a brilliant logistical system of getting goods around the world. And actually, rather than oppose what China's doing, every country should have joined and played a role in this Silk Road, Belt and Road Initiative. So there's no doubt that Chinese influence, and I see it here today in Phnom Penh. I'm staggered. And I saw it in Malaysia last week. And I'm in Thailand. I see it in Thailand. There's whole cities behind my house in Rayong that are Chinese cities. I ride on my bike past the Chinese flag, and I'm in Thailand. So, how are you going to push back on that? You're not. You have to live with it and actually co-prosper. But I think in Australia, it's impossible to have that discussion.
I don't mean to sound silly or naive, but do you ever worry about or actually receive substantial blowback from the people you write about or the topics you write about?
I think last year over the halal issue, I had at least 6 lawyers' letters from Sydney, from Melbourne, from Kuala Lumpur, from Singapore. I've had my computer hacked into where it sort of flew across the room. I know the ISD in Singapore is monitoring my phone. I know for sure. So I say good morning to them every morning. And I know I'm being surveyed. I've had the Mufti of Singapore accuse me of fitna or telling lies publicly. So you can Google my name in Singapore. You'll see the local media against me. I've got trolls making all sorts of funny comments that you can see on some articles. Sometimes it's been a bit scary. I've been warned, but actually COVID gave me a sense of security when things were very hot with some articles of Singapore. Well, I knew it was very hard for ISD to come in the COVID But I know the Malaysian Special Branch has an office in Had Yai. So, and I actually know the person. I actually sit across him in one of the restaurants. So they know me, I know them. But then on the other hand, I got into Malaysia without any problem, and I got out without any problem. So how much is paranoia and worry? And I had one article I wrote on somebody I personally knew, the Vice Chancellor of my university, and he sent commandos to my house in Malaysia. I wasn't there, but he did lose his job as Vice Chancellor, and that hurt. That actually personally hurt me for months. So you have to be responsible for what you write. So when you do write, and when you do get people in high positions and they fall, you have to live with the consequences. And I don't get the champagne or the beer out. I have to go through a bit of a grieving period. So, writing hard-hitting corruption, exposing articles emotionally costs a lot.
To move into my closing round of questions, what do you think is the most undervalued life experience that maybe university-age students don't give weight to? So what's an underrated skill or an experience?
Definitely experience. You can have all the degrees you have, and I know because I've taught in how many universities in the last decade and a half. A PhD before 1980 is worth many times more than a PhD done in the last couple of years. And I first went to uni in 1978 at Monash Economics, I remember. And the standard of what they taught us and the rigor of what they taught us in the 70s and the early 80s is so much different from the spoon feeding they get. It's all done with a textbook. We had to go to the library. There were cards to find stuff, and we had to sit there and read different points of view. Now they're just given stuff out of the textbook, and they can pass on having little knowledge. When they graduate, they know nothing. They get a job in 7-Eleven. So you need a degree in Thailand now to work in 7-Eleven, basically. What they're not getting is critical thinking, how to be creative, and how to turn an idea into some sort of tangible innovation or source of income. So I'm sad that we're churning out all these graduates and they don't have much of a clue of what to do.
And for yourself personally, have there been any books or people that have been very influential in shaping your worldview?
Yes, I've written a list. I've got a list here. I'm onto that page. Okay, I've put on Substack 2 people. Yeah, one is MGG Pillai, who is a legend. He's a Malaysian, Indian Malaysian, and he was on the front lines in Vietnam reporting. I think he was doing it for Reuters or one of those big organizations. He founded Asia Week. So if you're old enough, you'll know that Asia Week and the Far Eastern Economic Review were must read. If you don't have one in your lounge room, then you're not living. That was weekly reading. So, and then he opened up one of the first blogs back in the 2000. So he's a legend, and unfortunately he passed away many years ago. The second was Jeffrey Drummond, who was my professor when I did organizational behavior at Swinburne, and we were crazy. It was a time of Japanese manufacturing, and we used to go to places like Ford and Nissan, and we'd stand in the middle of the shop floor and we would ask questions. What does it feel like to work here? And in the 80s you didn't ask that question. So he was a major influence. Of course, then there was Edgar Schein, who wrote a book called Organizational Culture, and then Gareth Morgan, called Images of Organization, which he looked at organizations from different paradigms, and that was just mind-boggling, and that opened up so many things. William Olchi, Theory Said, where he talked about Japanese management, so he looked at management in a whole new paradigm. Ketz de Vries, who wrote a book called The Neurotic Organization. So he looked at the archetypes of neurotic disorders, and looked at organizations from that paradigm. That was like really well. Then there was Ling Kit-siang, Time Bombs in Malaysia. I remember buying that book in 1978 when I was in Ipoh and reading it and then imagining what Malaysia would be like with his vision. John Cribben's In Search of the Multiverse. That reinforced my idea about looking at things through different paradigms. The writings of Paul Ricoeur for narrative. Jared Diamond for his economic geography and his description of, read that stuff. That's better than James Michener for me. The Quran. I read the Quran how many times, but I saw it as one of the best business books about ethics and how to organize society. Then I was going to say the Torah, but the real thing that influenced me was the Wheel of Samsara, where I saw in Sun Mok in Surat Thani, and I wrote a lot of stuff from that, and gave me a deep understanding of the way our cognition works. That's the area I've been hanging around.
Yeah, perfect. There are some great, interesting recommendations there. I've got some catching up to do. But yeah, having now completed your book and doing the roadshows and stuff like that, what areas are you most curious about going forward? What's the plan?
I started working on. I went to Betong, where the Malaysian Communist Party had their tunnels, just like in Hanoi. They have tunnels, and they have it in Sadao, which is just down 30-40 from my home. And people left Malaysia to fight in the jungle. And of course they lost, and they signed a peace agreement, and some of them went back to Malaysia and some of them stayed where they are. But I spoke to their head, who was one of their children who managed all the tunnels as a tourist attraction. And he said that many of them feel that their life has been in vain. They fought on the losing side, and they're sort of asking what was the point of it. And I think they have a very important part to contribute to what the history of Malaysia and the region was. So we talked about recording their life and through interviews and collecting the narratives. So I tried a couple of times to get that going, but I found a young academic, Jason Ng at New Era University College, and he is utterly excited about going and interviewing. So we made arrangements, and in January we're going to go and do a series of interviews. And just to make it even more fun, we're going to use the works of Paul Ricoeur and Edgar Schein, and we're going to analyze the narrative using all these tools. So it's not just going to be a book of history. It's going to be a book using narrative as a tool to understand history. So that's really exciting. That's what I've always wanted to do. But before that, I've got a friend that's come from Hungary that I've been speaking to for years about a different view of sustainability. And I was going to write a book on this a few years ago, but the lady I was going to write the book with became the president of Mauritius. So she stepped up in society, and so this was something that was always going to be, and it's using economic geography. It's using the concept of Gaia, going to James Lovelock. James Lovelock is another must-read, and then looking at culture, social, going back to sustainable. Like going back to the 1950s, which is not going to save the world, but it's going to help decentralize, put an argument for decentralization away from urban environments, which actually, if you look at the statistics, they contribute about 15% to global warming. So I just don't understand why all these, young vanguard of environmentalists, they're talking about carbon, but there are a lot of practical things you can do, but they just talk the one thing, they don't act. So I think that can be a contribution. So they're two exciting things that I'm actually want to call the first one here. He's in Bangkok waiting, he's come from Hungary, and we're going to start now. So I'm excited about the future.
I don't know how you get it all done on top of running 15, 20 Ks a day. It's insane.
Well, that's part of the writing process, because I actually write when I'm running. But the problem is my mind can't hold everything in, and you have to stop running and with sweat write all these things down, so when you get home you can start going over them.
That's such a good insight into the writing process. Murray, thank you so much for coming on today. Is there anything else you want to plug? Where can people find you?
No, I'm on Substack, and then Eurasia Review and Asia Sentinel, and I've got a column now in FMT and My Seng Chu, which is in Chinese. So those who know me, they know where I am. But Substack there's something like 500 articles that go back to the 1990s. So there's a lot of gems there, I think.
And I'll include links to all in the description. But yeah, Murray, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a blast.
Okay, great to talk to you, and love your podcast.
If you enjoyed this podcast episode, be sure to check out the website compoundingpodcast.com. On the website, you'll find every episode complete with transcripts, show notes, and other related resources. If you want an email notification every time an episode releases, plus my lessons and takeaways from each episode, be sure to sign up to the Substack. So that's compoundingcuriosity.substack.com. Either way, links to all content mentioned today will be in the description below, and you can also connect with me on Twitter @ScarrettKalani. But until next time, have a good one.